Hello, everybody, and welcome to JTV. Now, I don't know if you're aware, but the British Parliament no longer just elects human beings to its chamber. It now also elects monsters, and one has just been elected recently to the House of Commons. This is George Galloway, and I'll show you him being sworn in just now.
I swear by Almighty God that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to His Majesty King Charles.
Now, this is George Galloway, who was elected for the constituency of Rochdale, and we're going to be talking all about him and delving deeper into understanding this monster, quite frankly. I'm thrilled to say, we're joined by Trudy Gold, who is she's appeared and featured in some videos on JTV previously, and I'm pleased to say that she's here to join us today. Trudy is, apart from being a very close friend and practically family, she is also one of the most highly sought after and knowledgeable historians of Jewish history. And what I want to talk to you about, Trudy, is I want you to tell us about Galloway, who he really is, to tell us about his past as well as his present. And then we're also going to go deeper into understanding the nature of the far left anti-Semitism, and you're going to talk to us a bit about that history. But first of all, Trudy, just thank you so much for joining us. And the first thing I want to ask is just if you can talk to us about who this man is. Give our viewers, who are both in the UK and around the world, a background to this man.
Well, as ever, Ollie, it's wonderful to see you. It's a shame we're having to talk about such a distasteful subject, but it's important, particularly as he's just been elected into Parliament for not the first time, you understand. And frankly, he hasn't got much chance of staying in after the election, but he is symptomatic of a disease that is beginning to sweep through England, or I should say through Britain, because he's actually Scottish. He was born in 1954 in Dundee. His father was a Scottish trade unionist. His mother was Irish with nationalist sympathies. A very, very political political family. Marxist views. He joined the Young Socialists when he was 13 years old, and when he was still a teenager, he was secretary of the Dundee Labour Party. So you've got to know someone who was always politically and ideologically motivated. He was the youngest ever chairman of the Scottish Labour Party when he was only 26 years old. So he's part of that group of very left-wing ideologues. And when you're an ideologue, everything is going to fit a pattern. In 1977, he took a trip to Beirut. He was already very much on the side of what he perceived to be the underdog, and I'll come on to that later. He was very, very pro-Palestinian. And he, during a libel case against the Daily Telegraph, something else you ought to know, he's very litigious. In 2004, he said he's going to devote his life to Palestinian and Arab causes. He's had quite a risque private life. He's been married 4 times, 3 to Muslim women who he's married in Muslim ceremonies. In fact, Jemima Khan, in an article, I think it was in the New Statesman, went as far as to say that he converted to Islam. And way back, he supported Dundee City Council when they flew the Palestinian flag over the city chamber building. And that was in 1980 when he twinned Dundee with the West Bank town of Nablus. He met Arafat many times. He was enamored of him. He supported the affiliation of the Communist Party to the Labour Party. Later, you will remember the militant tendency. He was against their expulsion. He was always on what I would call the hard left. Between 83 and 87, he's General Secretary of War on Want. And he was involved in financial scandals there. This is a very important interview he did in June 2012. He said, this is with The Independent, "I'm not a pacifist, I am a revolutionary. I am a socialist who doesn't like capitalism, who likes imperialism less. I am a revolutionary. I support the armed struggle when there is no alternative." He was thrown out of the Labour Party in 2003. He really supported Iraq. He visited Saddam Hussein many times. He opposed the Gulf War. He said Kuwait is part of a greater Iraq. He interviewed Saddam Hussein, and he got fraternal greetings when he got back to Parliament. He's the MP for Baghdad North. He campaigned against sanctions in Iraq. He becomes, what is also interesting, he called Bush the world's greatest terrorist, and he then gets involved with he decides to work with the Socialist Workers' Party. He creates the Respect Party. This is Nick Cohen in The Observer, and this is very important. An alliance between the Trotskyite far left and the Islamic far right. May I repeat this? Because this is the crux of the matter. Nick Cohen says it's an alliance between the Trotskyite far left and the Islamic far right. When he stood for Bethnal Green and Bow constituency in 2005, he stood against Una King. She was anti-Zionist, but she was half Jewish and half black. And she asserted that Muslim voters in her constituency had been told not to vote for her because she was Jewish. And he went much further than that, actually. He said that she would bring her Jewish friends to the constituency to make trouble. And when she brought this up, he threatened to sue her. As I said, he's terribly litigious. In 2010, in the Islamic Forum on Europe, he advocated Sharia law. And of course, he has become the darling of Muslims. Now, is it just the Islamists, or is it a large swathe of the Muslim community? He had a decisive role when the Respect Party split with the Socialist Workers' Party. He lost his seat in 2010. Now, these are all fringe groups on the far left, and he is so violently anti-Israel. This is the 17th of November 2005. All efforts made by he wins the election, he says, in 2005, one of his seats, despite all efforts made by the British government and Zionist movement and the press and the news, which are controlled by Zionism. He believes in Jewish conspiracy theory. He believes in Zionist conspiracy theory. Oh,
and this is him, by the way, with Ismail Haniyeh meeting with one of the heads of Hamas.
Oh, yes. And in fact, he got a passport from Ismail Haniyeh actually gave him a Palestinian passport, but he wasn't allowed to use it because the Israelis wouldn't let him in. He always said Hezbollah has never been a terrorist organization. As early as 2009, this is what he said: the Palestinian people are the new inmates of the Warsaw Ghetto. That was a speech in Trafalgar Square. Israel is the Nazi state. And this is when you have to ask yourself, has he veered between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism? He was deported from Egypt, by the way, in 2014. He had trouble with the Charity Commission. Now, you should understand that some of the more moderate Arab countries, and let's call Egypt a moderate Arab country for these purposes, they don't want truck with him. He works for Iranian television. He's very pro-Iran. In his campaigns, he's always shamelessly courted Muslim prejudice. For example, their hatred of alcohol. So he walked out of a debate at Oxford University in 2015 because he wouldn't debate with someone with Israeli citizenship. He said, I don't recognize Israel and I don't debate with Israelis.
That was with Elon Levy. Yeah.
That's right. He says no recognition, no normalization, just boycott, divestment until the apartheid state is defeated. If they want to speak about Palestine, the address is the PLO. So you've got a man who is totally sucked in to Arab politics. Now, the trouble is you have to look at his personality. He is never wrong. He's made mistakes in the past, which he never admits to. He falls out with the Iraqis later on, but he never, ever admits his mistakes. And if I were a psychologist, which I'm not, I would nevertheless suggest that maybe he has narcissistic tendencies. You will remember him in Big Brother House with Rula Lenska. And and the cat and the toe sucking, it is actually quite extraordinary. And the
I think we need
problem
to explain to
is,
people what we're referring to here. So he was in
I
a
think you should
big.
show them the clip. Why don't you show them the
We'll
clip?
show everyone the clip. So he was basically asked. He was in the Big Brother house, which is like a reality show where you get semi celebrity, or let's say C or D list celebrities, they're put together in a house for a few weeks. And I don't know the context, but he decided to pretend to be a cat at some point, or was asked to do so. This is him doing that. It's very creepy, but so don't feel obliged to watch this part.
Like me
He,
to be
you
the
know,
cat.
his detractors call him Gorgeous George. Yeah, let them watch it because they want to know what they're dealing with.
Yes. No, good pussycat. No, good pussycat. Yes.
This is the man who's just entered the British Parliament for the fourth time.
Good girl. Good
Does
girl.
it make you worry about
Now look at
democracy,
this.
Ollie?
I've got cream all over your whiskers. Yes. Good.
Now, while he's doing that,
Good.
um, I'm going to talk a little over him because it's
Yeah,
important.
sure, please, yeah.
In his speech, a speech in Leeds, we have
can't
declared
get more of
Bradford
this.
an Israel-free zone. We don't want any Israeli goods, services, academics. We reject this illegal, barbarous, savage state that calls itself Israel. Now, he wasn't prosecuted for it, and there was insufficient evidence, and this is where I have real problems with the law at the moment. The police did record it as hate speech, but it's an interesting line we have to cross there. Let me repeat it. We don't want any Israeli goods, services, academics. We reject this illegal, barbarous, savage state that calls itself Israel. And in October 2014, he actually abstained from a vote in the Commons, which formally recognized Palestine because it also recognized Israel as well. Now, I want to bring something in here because I think it's quite important. I want to bring in the IRA definition of anti-Semitism, because what I think it's important that we establish is he, yes, obviously he's violently anti-Zionist, but in fact, is he actually anti-Semitic? Now, IRA,
I'll get it up. I'll get up, Ira.
Okay, get IRA up.
Yeah.
Drawing comparisons of contemporary Israeli policy to that of the Nazis.
There we
That's
go.
what I want to find. Yeah. You can criticise the government.
And this has been adopted by the UK government, has it not?
Yes, yes.
And
yes.
you were just to tell our viewers, you were involved in this, weren't you?
I was one of the first British delegates to what was the ITF that became IRA. I was involved in teaching Holocaust studies all over the world. And I should mention, when it was all set up in the year 2000, we were really hopeful. 60 governments attended the meeting in Sweden. And the belief was that if we talked about the Holocaust properly, because every human dilemma is there, it might make people more sensitive to the other. Ironically, what has happened with the Islamists and the hard left, they have now come up with the greatest calumny of all, accusing Israel of being a Nazi state. And this is completely swallowed by this man. And I can go on and on. I can give you so many examples when he does this. And of course, the man who is his deputy, Williamson, he actually said after his election, he accused the Israelis again of perpetrating and called, and I think the thing that hurt most actually, to draw a parallel between Auschwitz and Gaza. Now,
well, you know that Williamson, when that one of the hospitals was bombed near the start, or the car park was bombed near the start of the war,
yeah.
and everyone thought it was Israel, and it turned out it was actually Palestinian Islamic Jihad. And Williamson tweeted during that time, before it was found out, that Israel has now forfeited its right to exist.
Well, you've got to understand with these people, they are totally ideological. When you're an ideologue, you have no reason, because reason requires thinking and debate. And with look, there's no doubt Galloway's clever. He's academically and intellectually quite a clever man. But there's something very dark and needy about him. You just look at his personal life. You look at the way he sees himself as Gorgeous George. His politics, It's the politics of the needy, and more than anything else, he wants to make a splash in the world. But what I think is the most dangerous thing, Ollie, and this is something that has infiltrated not just the extreme left, but the broad left, and to an extent the the liberal media, is this notion of the Nazification of Israel. I'm using that obviously for you, to make sure your viewers are quite aware. I'm putting it in inverted commas, okay? I'm not for a minute suggesting there's any equation myself. What I'm saying is there has been a concerted campaign to Nazify Israel. And I think it's important to talk about where it goes back to. And I'm actually going to give you a quote. Give me a minute, Ollie, to find it.
Trudy, can I ask, by the way, just out of curiosity, do you think the fact that Galloway's party is called the Workers' Party, and we know that that was the prior name of the Nazi Party, the National Socialists, do you think that's by chance that he chose that name?
I don't know, but you've got to remember Hitler also wanted to help the common folk. Galloway sees himself as a champ. No, he does. I don't think he sees himself as anything. He puts him out as a champion of the oppressed and the poor. I feel so sorry for the people in Rochdale. I really, really do. But let me find a very important quote. You'll be pleased to know that I've been trawling through the works of the great late Robert Wistrich. Yes, don't forget, let's go back to the origins of Zionism, and no, rather the origins of the creation of the State of Israel. Many of your viewers will know, but many of Israel's enemies will not know, that one of the sponsors of the State of Israel was the Soviet Union. In fact, Gromyko electrified the UN when he made a speech saying after the Holocaust, after the Jews deserved a state. And this is a statement in the Daily Worker, which of course is the paper of choice of the extreme left. He's describing what's going on in the War of Independence. There are Iraqis, fascist bands, reluctant Syrian and Lebanese regulars, professional Transjordan legionnaires, Egyptians, Britishers, a few German Nazis, Anders Poles, and even Yugoslav royalists. The far left, the Soviet Union, considered Israel to be an embattled little socialist state fighting against feudalism and tyranny and the British imperialists, okay? Golda goes to visit Moscow in 1949 as the first Israeli ambassador. 50,000 young Jews come out to greet her. Stalin has a Jewish problem because religion is dead in Russia, just as Christianity is dead, religion is the opium of the people. So what happens is you begin to see trials. There was a trial in Hungary. There was a trial in Czechoslovakia, the notorious Slansky trial, where they are accused of imperialism, Titoism, Trotskyism, and Zionism. And it builds. And then consider, gradually there is a regime change in the Arab world. Some of the feudal monarchies disappear to be replaced by Nasser, who is a socialist and a nationalist, and later creates the United Arab Republic with Syria. Now, this becomes great fodder for the Soviet Union as the Cold War exacerbates. And it's important to remember also America was very lukewarm about Israel in those days. Israel's real ally up until 1967 was France. And the other point to remember is that the Russians had another reason for being very angry with the Jews, because there's the Jews in Israel. Why? Because Ben Gurion, very, very short of money, did a deal with West Germany, the handshake. West Germany is ideologically opposed to the East. And this is when you see another upswing in propaganda. And there's a whole department in Russian universities looking at anti-Zionism. And this is fueled also in Egypt. There was a very interesting colleague of Goebbels, a man called Lears, who converted to Islam. He was a great friend of the Mufti of Jerusalem, Hajj Amin al-Husseini. He was working on anti-Israel propaganda in Egypt. So
what was
the
his full name?
Egyptians were getting it.
Trudy, what was his full name?
Lears, L-W-E-R-S. I can't remember his first name, but we can look it up. Okay,
Okay.
Lears. He was working on propaganda. He'd been working for
Was it
Goebbels. He was one of
Johann
Goebbels'
von
right-hand thing.
Leers? Is it
That's
this
right,
guy?
Johann von Leers. Yeah, that's him. That's him. He spoke lots of languages. He always liked the Arabs. He converted to Islam, and he worked for Nasser. He was invited in by Haj Amin, who he adored. There were also all these Nazi scientists. Loads and loads of Nazis found homes in the Arab world, and they're spewing out their anti-Semitism, which becomes anti-Israel. But Russia, it gets more and more ratcheted up, particularly after the 67 war, because Israel won that incredible victory. And this is when everything begins to go wrong for Israel in terms of public opinion on the left. Because you've got to think back to the 60s, you've got to think back to student revolution, you've got to think back to the formation of the PLO, Arafat, whose first task was to rid the Palestinians of their moderates. He becomes the leader of the Palestinian people. He swallows all the anti-Zionist rhetoric. And it's always that line between anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. And it's going to creep into left-wing student circles through the young socialists, and gradually Israel becomes the evil entity, particularly after 67, because Israel now is on the wrong side. And not only that, in this world of crazy intersectional politics, Israel is now seen as a white oppressor state who has colonized the poor Arab peoples. Nobody ever looks at the facts of the case. Nobody looks at what could have happened in 1947, 1948. That in fact, Egypt closed the doors to Gaza, and that Jordan, which after all had been carved out of the original Palestine mandate, set up the refugee camps. But then in 1967, they are taken over by Israel. Israel became the proud possessor of these Arab refugees who had been left in camps. And tragically, this is when it exacerbates. Because one of the things you also have to understand is that Arab nationalism is a late addition to the world of nationalism. And it coincides really with the beginnings of the disintegration of the Ottoman Empire. And another thing that also has to be taken into account is that all these left-wing groups see in the Palestinians these poor people who have been oppressed by the whites. But the reality is, Palestinian nationalism, the Arabs called the area Greater Syria. That was their dream. They wanted Greater Syria. So the problem is you're looking at one of the most complicated issues in the history of geopolitics. And you have characters who scream out solutions. And another point I want to make, why also has the liberal left gone along with these spurious accusations against Israel? I want to turn to the words of Howard Jacobson. Now, let's talk about the Shoah. How can there ever be an equation between what is going on in Gaza? And I want to say publicly, I think anyone must feel horrific sympathy when women and children are dying. But let's look at the facts. On October the 7th, on a Jewish holiday, a government, Hamas is a government, a terrorist government, invades Israel and perpetrates the kind of massacre that, as a Jewish historian, reminds me of some of the worst massacres of the Jewish people in history. It's almost like they read the manual. I know in the tunnels they found copies of Mein Kampf, they found copies of anti-Semitic literature. It's like they read the manual. They perpetrated this absolutely appalling massacre. But the next point to consider, even before Israel went into Gaza, the mob were on the streets.
Yeah.
So remember
it's
this.
Amazing, isn't it?
Hamas attacked Israel and perpetrated a terrible massacre. I wonder if it had happened in Britain, in the south coast of Britain, if Britain had been attacked and thousands of British citizens had not only been murdered in the most horrific way, but hostages were taken, including children and babies. how would the British public have reacted? What would they have expected the British government to do? But the mob are on the streets. And then, of course, one of the reasons Galloway had a seat was because the Labour Party candidate actually suggested, and again, this is the demonization of Israel, and I want to talk about that, actually suggested that Israel had allowed the massacre because it would give them an excuse to invade Gaza. That is the dehumanization of the Jew.
Yeah. While simultaneously denying much of what happened that day. The other thing, by the way, that I felt was going on when I saw those protests descending on London and all the Western capitals was that I felt that actually what's going on when you have protests before Israel has lifted a finger, a part of me felt like, just as you said, Howard Jacobson said, that Europe couldn't forgive the Jews the Holocaust, meaning they can't forgive the fact they've had to feel guilty about the Jews. I felt that same emotion was running through those people that went there. They couldn't bear the fact that for a moment they or the world had to feel some sort of guilt. So they had to find a way to suppress that, and that was by going out onto the streets and waving their flags and somehow justifying it. Did you feel that as well?
Oh, I think one of the problems, to even think about comparing Gaza to Auschwitz, I think you know, Ollie, my closest friend is an Auschwitz survivor. And I've worked with Holocaust survivors for many, many years. The Holocaust, and I even hate that word, let's call it the Shoah.
Why do you hate that word?
Between 33, because it means a burnt offering. It means a burnt offering. It was a word that was used. And don't forget the word genocide itself, which the Jews are now accused of, was created by a Polish Jew called Raphael Lemkin, who was looking for, he lost all his family. Yeah. He was very involved in the United Nations, the Declaration of Human Rights. But a genocide is an attempt to wipe a whole people off the face of the earth. How come the Palestine, I don't want to sound trivial, because I loathe what's going on with the bombings in Palestine, in Gaza. I wish there was another way. I really do. But the population has expanded since 1948. The Jewish population has not yet made up the numbers of those who died in the Shoah. There was an attempt to wipe them off the face of the earth, and it went on for 4 years. It begins as over 1 million people being shot. And then, of course, the camps, which created an industry of death. There is absolutely no correlation between the Shoah and what is going on in Gaza. So I have to look at the world, and I wonder, why is Gaza #1 item on the news nearly every day? And is it tied up with Holocaust guilt? And I want to read something to you, if you don't mind. It comes from a book called The Devil and the Jews. And the reason I want to read it to you, it was written by Trachtenberg in 1943. And he starts in 1943, in the war, while the Holocaust is happening. Why are the Jews so cordially hated and feared? By what mysterious legerdemain can a weak, defenseless minority be invested in the public eye with the awesome attributes of omnipotence? How is it that men believe of the Jews what common sense would forbid them to believe of anyone else? These are questions that must bother many people. Yet for all the vast literature that modern anti-Semitism has produced, there are questions that still await a satisfying reply. Do Jews control the press and industry, or whatever else you please? Basically, the point is, the Holocaust, the main reason behind the Holocaust, I know we can list, I've studied it for 40 years, we can list all the causations, but to me, the main reason is a 2,000-year-old history of Jew hatred. We are the other. We are guilty. It's St. Matthew's Gospel. You see it. It's the warrant for genocide. I'm going strong on this because it's time to go strong. There is a line in St. Matthew's Gospel where Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor, washes his hands of the death of Jesus, and the crowd scream, "Be it upon our heads and upon our children." That's the warrant for genocide. Now, the reality of the gospel story, it's not the time to debate, but it's a very interesting, because you can't debate faith, but have a look at the life of Pontius Pilate and work out whether you think the story was in fact an accurate story. I think not, but that's not the point.
So in other
The
words,
point is,
you're saying that the accusation of, let's say, deicide, that the Jews are accused
guilty
of
of the
committing,
crime of killing God.
That creates not just a guilt on Jews in the, let's say, the medieval Christian world and before that, but also it also grants them this special power, because if you can kill a god, then
exactly. Now look, I'm not insane. I do not believe the majority of Gentiles go around thinking of Jews as Christ killers. But what I'm saying, this negative stereotype, which was after Christianity achieved power, first with the Roman Empire and the huge spread, Jews were not allowed into many trades and professions. They do become the money lenders. They do become the merchants. They pray in a separate tongue. The fact that they're around, Christianity has superseded. So therefore, why are the Jews still around? Not only are they guilty of the crime of killing God, they don't accept it.
And Trudy, would you say that also is what informs the, let's say, the Islamist hostility? Because when you have, just as with Christianity, you have, well, what are the Jews still doing around? We've superseded them. So too, you've got the Islamists who want conquest, and then Israel is restored, and they're like,
well, it's not quite like that. So, you see, one of the tragedies is that there was a period in the diaspora when there were periods, like, for example, in the Iberian Peninsula, where Jews lived very comfortably under Islam. The problem is for Islamists, Dar el-Islam is the world of Islam, and no dhimmi people, that means Jew or Christian, can ever rule in Dar el-Islam. Look, I don't believe that Muslims in Britain, the majority of Muslims, want to take over the British state, although the extremists do, because there are Muslims living here. But certainly Israel is a problem. The actual existence of Israel is a problem in Dar el-Islam. Yeah. And so we muck around. You see, the West.
But Trudy, why they could take their protests to Spain? Islam once controlled Spain. Why is it Israel first? Why is that at the first pit stop?
Because it's the Jewish state, and that gives them the look. All this hatred that comes from Russia. You know, Mahmoud Abbas, who I believe is president of the Palestinian authorities. Do you know when his PhD was on at the Patrice Lumumba University in Moscow? The link between Zionism and Nazism. Look, there were interesting cases, and you see they've studied it. For example, in 1933, the head of the Reichsbank made an agreement with Zionists in Palestine to allow German Jews to leave without paying the whole of the flight tax, which was good for the German economy. And that's considered to be being part of the Nazis. I would have done a deal with the devil to save my family.
Yeah.
You know, and then the terribly controversial Kastner affair. Look,
but he's our moderate.
The story of the show. He's our moderate. Yeah, that you've got to remember how he was educated. And the Arab world, many of their leaders were educated in Russia. Russia turns violently against the Jews. Oh, and by the way, Galloway was terribly upset when the Soviet Union collapsed. He is hard left. But the point I'm trying to make out is that many of these ideas diluted have hit the liberal left in Britain.
Yeah, so let's just talk about...
Also,
let's just talk a bit about... Go for it.
Because what I want to say first is, let's be very careful. As I said, I do not believe the majority of Gentiles think Jews are guilty of deicide, but there isn't a positive image of a Jew anywhere in European society until the 18th century, when Lessing, a German enlightener, writes a play called The Jews, and it fails on the Berlin stage because no one can imagine a Jew as an enlightened person. So you've got that problem as well, Ollie. And yes, then you have the European Enlightenment, and then of course Jews become part of society in the West, and you have this incredible success story. But it leads to the growth of racial anti-Semitism, which is different from theological Jew hatred. And that is one of the contributing factors to the rise of Zionism. You know, one of the reasons the Jews stayed together as a people for 2,000 years, because they were the people of the book. You could say the rabbis surrounded them in the wall of law, which kept them safe. But they had once been a strong military group. And think Bar Kokhba, one of the great greatest of the Jewish heroes. And it's always now it's the tension between who are the Jews, the people of scholarship or the people with a sword in their hand. Because after the Shoah, think of the words of Abba Kovner, the leader of the Vilna ghetto: "We will never again go like sheep to the slaughter." They didn't, but there was a terrible angst in the Jews as well.
Yeah.
So what I'm saying to you, when you're dealing with the Shoah and with the guilt of the Western world, because let's face it, German and Austrian Jewry could have been saved in their entirety. And if you want a bit of British history, after the Evian Conference of 1938, which was to look at the plight of German and Austrian Jews, the British delegate, a man called Winterton, he was known as Wellies Winterton because he was too wet for jackboots, he actually apologised to the German ambassador in London for the unwarrantable interference in the affairs of a sovereign state. So once the camp, look, there were lots of articles. By December the 17th, 1942, the Inter-Allied Declaration recognised the murder of the Jews of Europe, and yet Hungarian Jewry was not attacked until the end of April 1944.
So
and
Trudy,
then
we're a bit short on time.
This is guilt. This is guilt.
For sure, we're a bit short on time, and I just want to bring it back to today again. What do you think are the implications of Galloway being back in Parliament? Can we just shrug our shoulders and say, look, he's been in and out of Parliament a few times, or is this does this sort of signal what's something to come in the future?
No, what really worries me, and I want you to think about Israel in another way as well, and I hear this from many clever non-Jewish friends. Israel is the bastion of the West now. If what you're looking at in the world we're living in now is that people who will not apply reason, I think Islamism is incredibly dangerous. The fact that the police are frightened or don't want to take action in cases, nobody will ever convince me that from the river to the sea is a benign statement. I am angry. I am very angry that the country that I've made my home in and I hope contributed to is now becoming almost a basket case when right is wrong and wrong is right. We have intersectional politics. We live in a world where truth is no longer important. It's your truth or my truth. Sorry, if someone's going to say to me that the Battle of Hastings, they might think it happened in 1067, but it didn't. It was 1066. And I think also the spread of the net, media, the thing I don't understand anything about, because believe me, Ollie, I don't want to, because it's evil what it's doing to people's minds. I'm told that no one will sit in a lecture hall under 25 for longer than 10 minutes because they haven't got the attention span. Maybe that's going too far. But I would say that when there's a wonderful, I'm going to misuse a quote of Disraeli's, when Jews feel anxious, there's something rotten in the state of Denmark. And we are feeling anxious. We are the canaries in the mine. But this time we're not going to be gassed, because that's what
right.
happened in the mines. But I don't think I've said enough on the Shoah. I think I've been a bit muddled on that. It's a product of the Western world. By the way, we've got no problems with Hindu India. We've got no problems with China in terms of their civilization. The Chinese are pragmatic. They're going to back the Arabs while it suits them. It's only in the old world of monotheism, because on one rather difficult level, Judaism is the parent religion of both Christianity and Islam. And neither of them like it very much. So you've got a real problem here. And
even to be honest, even liberal democracy and leftism, so many of their roots come from...
Well, this is the problem. I mean, I think it was MacDonald who said, of course we can't be anti-Semitic because Trotsky was a Jew. They should read Trotsky's last letters from Mexico, when he actually said the world is divided up into those countries that won't let the Jews in and those countries that won't let the Jews live. They don't read, they don't understand. They've got this mantra. You see, Marx, the daddy of them all, he was the grandson of rabbis on both sides. But he was converted, and he had we know he was teased at school. He had a terrible problem with his Jewishness. And he was what I call a self-hating Jew. And there are Jews who suffer from that today. I'm always accused don't use the term self-hating Jew. Look, I think there are certain people, and you often see this situation, when you belong to a group that is hated and despised, and you don't get any of the benefit of the warmth and the love that we get from being Jewish, you begin to hate it. Many of the disputations in history on this who have gone against the Jews have been converts. So that's another issue that has to be dealt with. And so we're in interesting times, Ollie. That's all I can say to you.
Yeah, we
But
absolutely
do I
are.
think? Look, I'm going to be an optimist. What I really would like to see is that more people of heart and soul are prepared to stand up, because they're going to lose their England. I'm talking about the English people, or the British people, let me say British, who do not like these marches disrupting, who do not know what it's about. And this is actually a mistake of the liberal left, because when you come to a country, you live by the rules. And if
Yeah.
you don't like that rules, go somewhere else. And I
Yeah.
think it's absolutely ludicrous that people don't learn the language, that they don't become part of society. This is not a melting pot.
No,
It's a mess.
it's
And
about being
we've got
functional. Yeah.
politicians who are not prepared. Everyone's frightened of being seen as racist or whatever. So you can't speak. Look, to call Israel a racist state, I think over 50% of the population of Israel are non-white, aren't they? And
Yeah.
has anyone
Yeah.
mentioned the million Jews who got kicked out of the Arab world? What happened to them?
Exactly.
Where's the sympathy for
And
them?
also, being
So,
white didn't help the Jews much in Nazi Europe.
no, it didn't, did it, Ollie? So what I'm saying is I'm not giving up hope, because I still believe there are decent people in this country. But just as they stood by in the 30s, at their peril, they're going to stand by now. That's what I'm
Absolutely.
saying. They're going to lose their the fact that idiots like, I'm not going to call him an idiot because he's clever, but the facts like George Galloway, a man who is so self-seeking. I do believe he's bought the mantra, by the way. It suits his purposes. That he is now a member of Parliament, along with people like Jeremy Corbyn. There are some absolute dustbins in the British Parliament now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Where are the greats? I went to a reception. Oh no, I shouldn't say this. Cut this out. But one thing that does interest me, in Downing Street, there are portraits of some of the greats. I just wish some of them were back now, because we desperately need leadership in every area, in politics, in education. Look at our education system. Look at how Jewish kids are being in the universities. What has happened?
There's a complete leadership vacuum around the world, and that's something that absolutely needs to be dealt with. But also, you're right, at a grassroots level, we can all do our bit. But Trudy, we've got to wrap up now. But thank you so much for sharing all these insights, and I'm sure our viewers are going to really, really appreciate this. It's important that we get clued up on the facts, and by becoming more aware, we realise the importance of of acting, taking a stand. So thank you.
Okay.
Thank you so much.